Hello everyone! Gilneas was once a very noble kingdom, and one which was proud of its ability to rely only on itself. Stepping foot in Gilneas was like stepping back in time to Victorian London, with the Cockney accents of the Gilnean people telling you to,
Get gabbing or get going.
The king of this proud nation was the brusque and gruff King Greymane. A hard-headed and stubborn man at times, the king was not a man generally open to small talk. But there was another type of person within Gilneas which even the king had to keep happy, namely the nobility. Although Gilneas was ruled by the Greymane family in literal terms, in practical terms it was the Greymane family and the nobility of Gilneas, which were the ruling class. Greymane had to keep the nobility happy, to keep their support and to keep his kingdom together. The main nobles of Gilneas are of course the Greymanes. The Godfrey family had the lands of Northgate. The Crowley family held the lands of Pyrewood and Ambermill. The Marley family held areas near the border of Gilneas. The families of Ewell, Ashbury and Walden all hold lands to the east of Gilneas, and the lands of the Tolvan and Candron families have been long since forgotten. Some nobles had more power and were more prominent than others, with Lord Darius Crowley and Lord Godfrey being some of the more influential. But unlike Lord Crowley, Lord Godfrey was not really a man of the people. He was not a man who could be called empathetic. Gen described Crowley as a man generally concerned for his fellow man, with no political angles at play. But about Godfrey, however, Gen was always suspicious of his ambition and motivations, and had a worrying doubt that Godfrey's suggestions, they were merely polished words, hiding his own political agenda. After the First War, as the Orcish horde advanced further into Azeroth, Gen he took some of the most influential nobles with him as they traveled to Lordaeron for their meeting with the others of the Alliance. He was again sending any aid to the other nations against the encroaching orcs, but Lord Crowley thought that Gilneas could never again call itself a neighbor or a friend to the other nations if they didn't help, whereas Lord Godfrey was mainly interested in the financial ramifications of abandoning the others. He suggested that Gilneas send only a token force to satisfy the Alliance and keep the trade routes open. And at the end of the Second War, the Alliance was faced with the choice of either killing the orcs that they had captured or sparing their lives. King Terranus Manethil decided to show them mercy by ordering them to be detained in internment camps, and this, along with the huge cost of building Nethergard Keep, rebuilding the destroyed city of Stormwind, it tore that fragile alliance apart. Greymane, incensed at the loss of Gilnean life for a conflict that he did not see as involving his people, angry at the money requested of Gilneas for rebuilding Stormwind and interring the orcs, he came to a decision that would change the course of Gilneas for years to come. It was the Lord Godfrey that again told his plan of building what would become known as the mighty Greymane Wall. He would lock Gilneas away from the rest of the world. The plight of other countries had nothing to do with his kingdom or his people, but the wall, it could not be placed around the borders of Gilneas. They were all too pliable. It would have to cut through a noble's land, and this is where Godfrey saw his opportunity. Since Gen had initially thought of cutting off the land of Lord Marley, but it was Godfrey who suggested cutting through the lands of Lord Crowley instead. Gen was assured that his suggestion was due to the mountainous region, creating a natural and impenetrable barrier. But Godfrey's motivations, they were not based on the landscape. Aside from getting rid of the dissenting voice of Lord Crowley, putting that wall through Lord Crowley's land, it also meant that Godfrey's land it would be nearest to the wall, and therefore the most strategically valuable. A point that was not lost on the king. Either way, the Greymane Wall was built sometime after this, and the small villages of Pyrewood and Ambermill, they were cut off from Gilneas, abandoned outside of the wall. Tensions were bubbling up within the city. The wall, it was a controversial move that not everybody supported. Nevertheless, the great and imposing Greymane Wall was constructed, and Lord Godfrey, he was quite pleased with himself. He had, in his own terms, turned lemons into lemonade. And then Gilneas went silent to the outside world. Nobody would hear from them, and all pleading requests for help from Lordaeron, they went unanswered. Things behind the wall were not as peaceful as Gen had hoped, however. Tensions had reached a fever pitch when the wall had been erected. When Gilneas turned a blind eye to the request for help for Lordaeron, and similarly ignored the dire plight of Pyrewood and Embermill, who'd been left defenseless against the encroaching Scourge threats. Those tensions boiled over. Lord Crowley promised he would end Gen's tyranny, and those disillusioned Gilneans who were questioning the path that the nation was taking, they joined him. A full-blown civil war called the Northgate Rebellion. It rampaged through Gilneas, and Crowley had even sent some of his men, known as the Gilneas Brigade, to assist Jaina Proudmoore and the Alliance. During this bloody feud, Lord Godfrey was on the sides of the Royalists, those loyal to the king. Many lives were lost in the Northgate Rebellion, and Godfrey, he was very proud of his additions to the final tally, later telling Gen that he spilled more rebel blood than Gen could care to imagine. With the rebellion unable to overcome the king's resistance, the leaders of the rebellion, including Crowley, were imprisoned for treason. Gilneas had no time to heal, however. There were strange things happening outside of the walls that could not be attributed to the Scourge. Sightings of strange wolfman hybrids outside of their walls, and people killed with deep claw wounds. They had taken to call the killer of these unfortunate souls to be the Starlight Slasher, and it was this killer who Gen believed had just murdered Halford Ramsay, a Gilnean detective. The king sent out his men to hunt down the killer, and Godfrey reluctantly agrees, seeing no point in the decision. As the days went by, livestock were being killed, and more people were being murdered inside of their city walls. The murders no longer confined to the villages caught outside of their wall. People were afraid to leave their homes. It may be that Godfrey was genuinely seeking to aid Gilneas and deal with the threats outside of the wall, as he showed Gen a picture of a wolfman demanding action from the king. These wolfmen, who would later be known as the Worgen, they were Godfrey's fixation. He seemed to be disinterested in the relentless scourge who would continue to rise in numbers and were beating at the wall every day. He asked Gen for 10 men to go into the woods with him to hunt down these bestial men, and was infuriated when Gen refused the request. Perhaps Godfrey really had Gilneas' best interest at heart and was only seeking to destroy a threat. But it's no coincidence that when Gen was generally in fairer standing in Gilneas, before this whole civil war, that Godfrey did everything in his power to satisfy the king. And now that Gen's control over his nation, it was slipping faster and faster out of control. It was time for another approach. Making an unpopular king happy now, it would gain Godfrey nothing. And the threats of beings that could breach the Great Wall and ruin his lands, it was not something that Godfrey was keen on. He started pushing Gen and criticizing him. And when he told the king that he had lost his edge and that nobody would blame him for leaving the decision-making to somebody else, Godfrey's motivations, they became apparent to Gen as well. But the king was in no mood to play political games, especially with so many threats still encroaching upon them. And he told Godfrey that if he didn't need every capable man right now, he would have him chained to a dungeon wall. So things between Godfrey and Gen, they weren't really smooth, and our interactions with Godfrey, they start right at the beginning, in-game during the Worgen starting event. This takes place as the Worgen launch their assault on Gilneas. Civilians are being evacuated from the market square, and Gen tasks us with freeing Lord Crowley from prison, along with his men, while Godfrey thinks that we should leave him to the Worgen. But we fortunately decide to go along with Gen's idea instead. Even with that increased firepower, it is obvious that the city itself, it needs to be evacuated, and we're asked to rescue a trapped citizen, the master alchemist Krenan Aranis. As we battle on through the city, we at some point lose sight of Godfrey, but we know that during this mayhem, he sees the now Worgen Halford Ramsay, along with the night elf Ballistra Starbreeze, being trailed outside of the city walls, though he has little idea that the Worgen in front of him is actually the detective previously thought to have been murdered. When they are spotted, Ballistra shouts that Halford is not a feral Worgen. Regardless of this though, Godfrey still shoots him in the chest, and he leaves Ballistra outside to fend for herself, telling the guards that, whatever she is not Gilnean. In-game, we catch Godfrey soon after. As the newly transformed Worgen player is locked up in a cage, he approaches us, and he tells us that our kind, the Worgen, they've been roaming the wilds unchecked for far too long.
Look at what you've become. Those cursed beasts. They've left you nothing more than just another wretched mongrel. Do you even remember what you did to your friends? Your kind, haunting the wilds unchecked, until we found you. They've kept you alive because they still believe you can be saved. To which I must ask, is there even a shred of humanity left within you? Perhaps we will find out soon enough.
As we come around, we find ourselves in stocks, surrounded by the alchemists that we rescued earlier, Kren and Uranus, as well as King Gen and Godfrey. Before we have a chance to speak, Godfrey tells Uranus to put us down as his protocol. He is quickly shut down by Kendo, but this and his actions earlier, they do give us an insight into Godfrey. When he doubted whether we even had a shred of humanity left, we could ask the same to Godfrey. He was happy to go along with the plan of the Greymane Wall, leaving the Alliance and the small villages of Pyrewood and Embermill behind, along with their people. He was happy to leave Ballistra's Starbreeze to the Worgen, as he was with Lord Crowley, and now he wants to put us down as well. Perhaps Godfrey just wants to save Gilneas from outsiders, from the Worgen, from anything that isn't Gilnean, but his actions, they certainly aren't those of a compassionate man. This uncertainty over his motivations, it is a running theme with Godfrey throughout his Warcraft story, and in a lot of ways, it's open to interpretation. Now with the city overrun, the Gilnean residents, including the newly transformed Gilnean Worgen, they traveled to the village of Duskhaven. It was a short few weeks later that the cataclysm would happen, and the effects of the corrupted Earth Warder Deathwing they could be felt all the way in Gilneas. The south of the kingdom had previously had a naturally impenetrable reef enclosing it, keeping the Forsaken armies at bay. With the cataclysm, however, not only was the Greymane Wall damaged, the reef keeping the southern borders of their nation safe, they were also breached. The Forsaken would not waste this opportunity and press this fortunate advantage, invading Duskhaven. We as the players, we catch up with Godfrey in his cellar, where he tells us that although we are a feral killing machine, we are with him for now, and he could use our ferocity to clear out some of these assaulting Forsaken. Once we start to kill some of the Forsaken, he sees how effective we are at it, and he says, although you're a bloody beast, you're our beast. Unfortunately, this friendliness, it seems to be a passing phase for Godfrey, and we will later learn that the King of Gilneas himself, Gen Greymane, is also a Worgen. Godfrey is shocked and angry.
Impossible!
He does not accept the Worgen as being part of Gilneas. Maybe it's the fear, or perhaps it's resentment for a change that's coming to Gilneas and its people that he does not like. Godfrey, he benefited from the old ways of Gilneas. The Gilneas that had shut itself from the world, and who considered traitors to be traitors, and beasts to be beasts. Now he's faced with a Gilneas, where his comfortable life and standing, it's all falling away, where the leader of the rebellion is now best friends with the king again, and where the enemies that he once hunted through the woods, he was expected to call his fellow Gilneans and accept as his king. Eventually, we learn from Crennan, who we pick up on the side of the road, that Gen has been kidnapped by Godfrey and the Eastern Barons, namely Baron Ashbury and Lord Walden. Godfrey intends on handing Gen over to the Forsaken to reach some kind of deal, believing that he can save Gilneas. After tracking down Godfrey and his accomplices, we make short work of Lord Walden and Baron Ashbury before we rescue Gen. As we appear alongside of him, Godfrey learned his plan had been thwarted, and instead of turning himself over,
No, I'd sooner die than have one of your kind for a king!
He decides to jump off the cliff, claiming that he would sooner die than have a Worgen for a king. Well, Godfrey, be careful what you wish for. Gilneas would later be forced to be abandoned by most of its people, including King Gen, who made the way for Darnassus. Those who stayed behind, they united under Lord Darius Crowley, himself a powerful Worgen, and they formed the Gilneas Liberation Front, determined to push the Forsaken back from their home and reclaim their city. This determined band of Gilneans, along with some help from their welcome allies in Stormwind's 7th Legion, they were able to overwhelm a Forsaken garrison and push the enemy back into Silverpine Forest. But the Forsaken, they were not going to go without a fight, however, and the bodies of Lord Godfrey, along with Baron Ashbury and Lord Walden, they were retrieved from where they fell. With the assistance of her Val'kyr, Sylvanas resurrects Godfrey, Ashbury and Walden as Forsaken. The irony of their new forms is not lost on Godfrey, but he tells Sylvanas, better dead than worgen, or rather in this case, better undead than a beast. Godfrey was by all accounts fighting against Gilneas, the home that he had fought to defend all his life, be it from enemies or an unwelcome change. He first sets his sights on weeding out the Gilnean Liberation Front from their base in Pyrewood Village. Before, he had seen to Pyrewood and Embermill banished from Gilneas by his own recommendation, and now he was the one purging it, ordering adventurers to burn it to the ground. He also orders adventurers to kill a general of the Stormwind's 7th Legion, to soften their ranks and sow discord amongst them. Is this perhaps what he wanted all along? To punish those who interfered in the business of Gilneas? In his business? Or is this perhaps more to do with his transformation into a Forsaken? Godfrey even goes so far as having Lorna, the daughter of Lord Darius Crowley, captured on Sylvanas' orders. He has no regrets, no moral dilemmas over kidnapping Lorna, and he even wishes that we could just kill her and raise her as a Forsaken as well. This was, after all, the daughter of Darius Crowley, who was and still remained his biggest opponents. The question that we asked ourselves back when we first became worgen, when we wondered about the humanity of Godfrey as he wondered about ours, it becomes clearer the further this story progresses. And it would be Godfrey to be the one to bring Lorna Crowley in front of her father, standing alongside Sylvanas, who wants to use her as a bargaining chip. Darius accepts the offer of his daughter in return for his unconditional surrender, and he retreats. But Godfrey, he wastes no time in turning on Sylvanas, shoots her point blank, and ends her life. Gilneas would be his, he exclaims, and then all of Lordaeron would follow. Now wanted by both the Alliance and the Horde, Godfrey makes his escape to Shadowfang Keep, which was once the home of Archmage Arogal, the one that summoned the worgen for Gilneas to begin with. This would now be Godfrey's home, and tossed by both Deathstalker Belmont on the Horde side, or Ivar Bloodfang on the side of the Alliance. The adventurers once more make the way through Shadowfang Keep, where Godfrey is plotting the downfall of both factions, and we end this undead life. This time, Godfrey would not be resurrected. He thanks us for a clean death, as he would not have done the same. And there is where the story of Lord Vincent Godfrey ends. A politician with a heart that beated for Gilneas, but perhaps it beated just a little bit more for his own ambitions. Life had some ironic twist for him in store. Who knows if they'll ever bring him back. But yeah, for now, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, maybe even subscribe to the channel. And until next time, see ya!